Hi, I'm Katherine Litwin, the Library Director at the Poetry Foundation, and along with my colleague Fred Sasaki, Creative Director, I work to curate and organize exhibitions. Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation with poet and artist Monica Ong about her exhibition, Planetaria. Planetaria is an exhibition of visual poetry by Monica Ong that uses the language of astronomy to explore the precarious territories of motherhood, women in science, and diasporic identity. Her work is an invitation to rewrite the sky from a female perspective and examine the power struggles in myth-making. Some poems remix astronomical diagrams, family photos, and scientific syntax with new lyrics. Others imagine Chinese star maps as poems, creating legends that move us away from gender hierarchies and towards the boundless universe where everyone belongs. These visual poems, like all poems, are works of art. They're also letterpress broadsides, decals, designs, and objects, including a lunar volvel, a planisphere, tarot deck, and Viewmaster reel. So now, Fred, I would love it if you could talk us through what visual poetry is and your own definition of visual poetry.
Sure. Thank you, Katherine. I'm Fred Sasaki, the creative director at the Poetry Foundation. My role is to care for the art and design of poetry. And that means hair spaces on the page to large-scale window installations like we have in Planetaria. So in this exhibition space, we look at poetry that is visual art, or objects, prints, or in this case, a Viewmaster reel, planisphere, or tarot cards that embody poetry in some way. So what does that all mean, you might ask? And I would say, you tell me. It's a collaborative engagement, and we are an essential part of the way that we experience this work, in the way that we read it, the way that we hold it, the way that we embrace it. So that might not be entirely helpful to people, but I do have some tips when people ask how to engage with the work. And so basically what I say is visual poems are poems that you look at or visuals that you read.
So Monica, I would love it if you could talk me through your process of creating a visual poem.
To me, a visual poem is a work in which the lyrical composition and the visual elements work together syntactically to create the meaning in the poem. They don't echo one another like a caption or an illustration would, but they both, contribute to a poem's content, structure, and its meaning. There is definitely engagement with the composition of language, as well as a rigorous set of design decisions that help to give shape to the context of the reading, and kind of sets up an alchemy for the relationship between the text and the image, as well as with the page or the space and with the reader.
I love this idea of alchemy, that the alchemy I'm imagining happens when the text and the image are placed together, right? It's them in concert that is making meaning for the reader.
Absolutely. And in a way, I'm thinking about how they can enhance one another. And every single aesthetic decision tries to really serve, the meaning of the language. When I engage in my creative process, there is both, an engagement with the lyrical composition of the work that help to create, kind of the cognitive understanding, whether it's by supporting it or even creating interesting tensions that can really be engaging for the reader.
Could you talk a little bit about the inspiration for creating Planetaria?
Planetaria is a series of astronomy-inspired poems that I created in a way to work against this idea that our lot in life is writ in the stars. For example, you hear that phrase tossed around a lot. And when I think about, what we've all been going through, particularly women and folks from marginalized communities, I always ask myself, well, who does that actually benefit when we say that? And how might we imagine, rewriting these narratives? And as I was exploring also histories of star lore, I kept wondering why there were so many figures and symbols of male conquest and warfare enshrined in these stars. And as someone who's also a practicing designer, I kept thinking to myself, there's got to be a way to sort of redesign these, right?
Mhm.
And I was also interested in surfacing non-Western narratives of the stars. There are so many different kinds of star histories, and I wanted to make poems that were visually engaging, that would allow readers to spend some time with different star systems. Um, and also other hidden histories. For example, there's so many stories of women in science that I
Mhm.
discovered while making the series, women whose stories really inspired me, and it was the kind of inspiration that I really needed,
Mhm.
especially during these times, to kind of navigate, all kinds of different social spaces. Um, and finally, I wanted to figure out ways to map stars to, personal experiences of things like working motherhood, as well as, in thinking about our ancestors as the first cosmonauts, and that kind of immigrant experience. So it's a very wide ranging,
Mhm.
series of narratives. But I find that, the space of astronomy and these sort of cosmic perspectives are really expansive. And it was a really exciting way to make room for all these stories. Mhm.
And will you tell us about the Starman,
The
as we've
Starman.
lovingly referred to him?
Yeah, so one of the poems in Lost Astronomy is called Her Hypothesis, and it features what looks like a little boy kind of floating in these stars. And those stars are actually an illustration by William Herschel of his imagining of like the shape of the universe. And I noticed that the shape of those stars seemed to perfectly fit this old photograph I have of my father's deceased brother, my uncle Pedro. And so when I collage those together, I ended up with the Starman, who kind of sort of became a mascot for, this exhibition, but also for the micropress that I started.
Thinking about your poem, The Stargazer, and that piece, could you talk to me a little bit about how you use the Chinese night sky in the planisphere?
Yeah, so with the Stargazer, I wanted to create a poem that would change over the course of the year. And so I based this on a star chart from 1193 during the Song Dynasty. It's called the Su Chao Astronomical Chart. And it's a chart that actually, in those times, was used by the emperor for astrological purposes. But in this particular piece, I wanted to be able to turn it into a planisphere such that when you turn it to any given date and an hour, you'd be able to see a poem in the stars, and that different parts of the year, a different sky will present a different poem to the reader. The Stargazer, a reading of the poem as seen in the night sky on March 4th, the birthday of Teresa Hakkyangcha. You are here to enter the palace of your life, to meet yourself on the side of the road, arms waving beneath a tender sky. Don't scold, don't fall in the grass face down, this body counted among us. Slow the car to a purr, doors unlock from the terrace, secret sails drifting towards the wing of the red bird. Time's curtain draws open a temple of incense, my heart in ashes. Step off Moonstone, the way Chang'e floats over swelling waters, who carries you a beacon of ghost kin. Your solitude, a deeper well, where rivulets flow, willows tap the kitchen window, stars send arrows to the land of God and soil. Women warriors gather, take comfort, lifting voices over the vast silence. Bury this whip-wet heap of corpses, a pond of glass. Self slanders blood moon mansion of darkness, eavesdrops wound and whisper in the ear. A prayer in 9 doors still holds the unseen promise of a meadow, your orchard of handheld poems. Your silver horses find their feet in pools of silt, the fog's outward gaze we share. In dream revision, home is woven from sky, not skin.
Whatever it is you withhold from yourself, give it generously.
So what I loved about working on this tarot card project with the Asian American Literary Review was that it was this idea of writing as a community, because to me, that process of writing in community is also a way of healing in community as well. And it was a really real thrill to be asked to create artwork, in response to the writing of 6 different writers, and to also be able to integrate, images, pieces of archive, or lines, from their work into the artwork for these pieces. And I think, again, it's like in doing so too, it's about like expanding space, for narratives.
I love that your artwork is a through line between the stars of their own writing. So your series of cards is itself a constellation in a sense.
And what I like about the idea of constellations too is that it's a collective that's non-hierarchical, right? That is about, finding points of connection, and together, illuminating a space together.
And reverberation, right? So these cards, depending on their order or position, vibrate with each other and create different meanings, like the elements in your poem.
Absolutely.
Do you see a lot of parallels between the ideas of stargazing and reading?
Yes, so for this particular piece, I wanted to create a poem where the reader would be able to allow their eyes to wander across the stars and make the connections that feel most natural to them. And what I love about this is that every time a different person reads The Stargazer, it's a completely different poem because each person wanders so uniquely. And I love that from this planisphere, so many different poems emerge from different readers.
Monica, I'm speaking about working in labor. I'm thinking about your piece, The Dark Side of the Moon, which really engages labor that is not always seen or acknowledged on the part of women. And I'm wondering if you could talk with me about your process of creating that piece and sort of the different elements that are present and make up that piece.
So the visual poem, The Dark Side of the Moon, is definitely a meditation on women's labor that is mapped on a blind embossed surface of the moon. And what I did was I used data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter to outline over 500 craters to build a file that I sent to my collaborators at Boxcar Press, who created a metal plate to help produce this beautiful blind embossed surface of the moon. And on top of that, we then had the poetry hot stamped in platinum silver foil, almost as though they were like labels of, features of the moon. But it's a kind of poem that you kind of can read around like you would a map, for example. And what I was interested in building this piece was the idea of the embossed layer representing the way, women's labor have undeniably, shaped our professional fields, and how and in contrast to that, how little text is devoted to these stories in the historical record.
Dr. Chen-Xiong Wu was a Chinese-American experimental physicist. In 1956, she was approached by colleagues Tseng Dao Li and Chen Ningyang to devise experiments to disprove the law of parity conservation in radioactive decay. Wu placed cobalt-60 into an electromagnetic field at low temperatures and observed that weak interactions among particles were not always symmetrical, overturning a long-held principle of physics. Thanks to the Wu experiment, Li and Yang were awarded the 1957 Nobel Prize in Physics. Wu, however, was not included. Her name Chen-Xiong translates as courageous hero. The Dark Side of the Moon. Our labor rises from this side of the moon. Explosive, precise, prolific, yet glimpsed in libration, not liberation. History's gaze tidally locked on our other half. Across your ridges, mountains of evidence map the fission of your mind and the unmirrored truth of all things. Noble women know how to find each other in the dark, between motes of dust and doubt. Pay no mind to stares that care only to caress the surface. Another word for genius is courageous hero. We did much more than survive. Some of us teach our daughters to hang red lanterns at the ends of their limbs, wonder where they wander in the cold cobalt night. In weak interactions among particles or men, you proved more than anyone how symmetry is violated. In your shadow, my sleep breaks. Fields of glass-wing butterflies shatter the myopic sky. Invisible in plain sight, flying straight into this eye.
So something I love about the exhibition, and I like to tell people, is that these are solar-powered poems. And I just love that triangulation between the sun, the poem, and the self, and with the way that the sun shines through these window installations and illuminate it or reflect off of this, is it platinum type on the moon, and reveal the craters therein. Noting that I love that aspect of the work.
No, absolutely. I think for me, there is something about creating works that create a quality of light that is something that is intimate, that the viewer can experience.
White tiger. The white tiger of the western sky rules over 7 mansions, 3 stars, turtle beak, net, hairy head, stomach, bond, and legs. Associated with the season of autumn and the element of metal, her snowy fur allows her to blend in with her surroundings. 3 stars, 2 rings, a newborn sun tucked up in the corner eye. My breasts wear this suckling star like a turtle beak talisman, feeding, listening for my foremother's echoes in the afterlight. There are leaps for which no net appears, nor practiced equations enough to hold up a crumbling bridge. Tiger moms prowl orchards of ripe rambutan, their hairy heads needling each other's spines until someone cracks. I found myself soft, translucent, an aerial heart unzipping my red leather jacket. Sewn into the stomach lining, sorrow autumns into gold, ghost leaves kiss the astral soil. What is this bond of cat and cub, the secret sap that calls the bees back year after year? Let me be a stopping place, a garden to drop both rot and seed, the not knowing of how this will all grow. My sun curls into the warmth of my crossed legs. Pink knees and elbows hang off these aging edges. We are nothing but 2 maps overlapping, staving off a slow drift.
Thinking about your piece, White Tiger, can you talk to us a little bit about the 4 guardians and explain what the 4 guardians are?
White Tiger is one of a series of 4 constellation poems in Planetaria, and they exist within the context of the Chinese night sky, which I would say is not made up of constellations, but more so asterisms, because asterisms are these smaller clusters of stars. And in the Chinese night sky, there are over 250 asterisms that are made up of over 1,500 individual stars. And within these asterisms, there are what's called the 28 mansions. And the 28 mansions are governed by 4 animal guardians. I found the symbolism of each animal kind of compelling and was trying to think of it as an opening for writing poetry that could interrogate, family histories, motherhood, and what these symbols could mean, at least, today in a contemporary context. As someone who works as a digital designer, that can be kind of lost, with work that's online, but that when, you can create something that can feel so intimate that you can hold in that space together, that's something I really enjoy. And I think it's also about like creating poems that, invite a really pleasurable aesthetic experience as well.
There's so much like design rigor. It's so intensely, beautifully crafted, but then it's not precious. And I appreciate the way that you allow your work to fill whatever vessel is presented. Like we printed your poem in the magazine on paper. We blew them up for a window decal, really. And just how important it is to sort of let the work flow and to allow for, a varied experience of the work.
And also it's very changeable in the space. So one thing that I've loved having it in our space is that it looks different at different times of the day, like the dark side of the moon, depending on the angle of the sun. Different facets are revealed in that piece, which is really lovely.
We brought our children, and they engaged, and I just would love to hear you talk about the importance of touching these poems and playing with these poems.
Yeah, well, I love the idea of play, of interactivity, of creating poems with a strong sense of invitation to the reader. And again, to kind of think about expanding, the doorways, right, through which folks can come in and like experience, poetry. And part of it is also because, I came from a family where, generations before, they weren't literate, and I always think about, how do I create poems that my aunties and my folks could enjoy, without feeling like, they needed a PhD or something, right? But that they could just come as they are to enjoy. And I think for me, engaging in all these different modes was a way to sort of expand and open up that experience. But I, when I was creating Planetaria too, I was also thinking about this younger generation, particularly my son, and thinking about, again, how do you design an experience of poetry that is joyful, and but that also allows them to carry important questions along with them as they experience this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Monica, for joining us in conversation about Planetaria today. This has been a really wonderful, illuminating look at your work, and I think it'll be really helpful for visitors to the exhibition to see greater context and depth in all of these pieces.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you, Fred. It's been such an honor.